For centuries, deep under the Central American canopy, massive stone cities sat silent. Stairways swallowed by roots, carved monuments weathered into shadow. Then came the stories: alien exodus, ancient biological weapons, a civilization erased in one impossible event. But those claims begin where the evidence runs out. Then aircraft-mounted laser scanning cut through the trees. LiDAR pulses fired from aircraft slipped through gaps in the forest canopy and measured the ground below. What came back was not emptiness. Platforms, roads, terraces, reservoirs, settlement patterns buried under green cover. The jungle had not been hiding a few isolated ruins. It had been hiding the footprint of an enormous engineered world. And that is where the mystery gets sharper. A system this extensive needed water, food, labor, and trust. So why did royal centers across the southern lowlands fall silent one after another? The scan does not answer that. It forces a cleaner question. What exactly disappeared? What disappeared was not the Maya people. That distinction matters. Maya communities never vanished from Central America. Millions of Maya descendants live today across Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and beyond, speaking Maya languages, preserving traditions, and carrying histories that did not end when certain stone cities were abandoned. On the map, the real mystery gets smaller and more precise. Between roughly 750 and 900 CE, many great royal centers of the southern Maya lowlands began to fail. The surviving record shows courts commissioning fewer monuments. Dynastic histories break off. Palaces, plazas, reservoirs, and ceremonial centers that had organized political life are gradually left behind. To someone arriving centuries later, empty stairways and roofless temples could look like a vanished civilization. Abandonment is not extinction. A political system can collapse while people migrate, adapt, rebuild, or continue elsewhere. So the investigation follows three kinds of record: the claims that grew around the silence, the physical evidence in stone, soil, bones, and water, and the living Maya reality proving the story did not end in the jungle. From there, the question becomes sharper. Why did these powerful southern lowland cities fail, one after another? To see what failed, start with the map. Not one Maya empire, but a crowded field of rival kingdoms. Across what is now Guatemala, southern Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and nearby regions, cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, and Palenque rose as separate courts, each with its own rulers, alliances, enemies, monuments, and sacred claims to power. These were not isolated temples in empty forest. A major city was infrastructure, farmland, ritual space, and royal theater all at once. Farmers shaped land for maize, beans, squash, and cacao. Engineers stored seasonal rainwater in reservoirs and channels because much of the lowlands had long, dry months and few permanent rivers close enough to trust. Causeways tied districts together. Terraces held soil on slopes. Plazas gathered crowds for ritual, tribute, markets, and royal display. At the center stood the king, often presented as a sacred mediator between people, ancestors, and gods. His authority had to be performed in public, renewed through ceremony, and recorded in stone. Stela named victories, accessions, dynastic marriages, captives, calendar dates, and the divine logic of rule. That is why the later silence matters. When a court stopped carving monuments, it was not an artistic pause. It could mean the institution organizing labor, legitimacy, and public memory had begun to break apart. For a long time, archaeologists could only see the pieces pushing through the trees. Then researchers scanned the canopy from above, and the ground plan underneath proved far larger than anyone had mapped on foot. From the ground, that world appeared in fragments. A temple here, a carved stairway there, a causeway disappearing into green shadow. From above, LiDAR changed the scale of the evidence. An aircraft sends rapid laser pulses through the forest canopy. Most bounce off leaves and branches, but enough reach the ground to let researchers strip the trees away digitally and model the surface beneath. In a landscape where roots, vines, and soil can hide buildings, that becomes excavation by measurement. In Guatemala, the Pacunam LiDAR initiative surveyed large areas of the Maya Biosphere Reserve and revealed more than 60,000 previously unknown or poorly documented structures beneath the canopy. Not one lost city, a whole inhabited landscape. The scans showed house platforms, raised roads, terraces, modified fields, canals, reservoirs, and defensive features where conflict may have reshaped the land. What looked like isolated ceremonial centers became nodes in a dense web of labor, farming, transport, and political control. LiDAR does not tell us why the southern lowland courts failed. It cannot read hunger in a household or fear in a royal court. But it changes the question. If tens of thousands of structures were tied into engineered fields, water systems, roads, and fortified zones, then the puzzle is how such a crowded landscape kept itself fed, watered, and obedient through bad years. Scale was the first forensic clue. The greater the system, the more impressive its achievement, and the more dangerous its dependence on rainfall, harvests, labor, and trust. After the lasers reveal the hidden city beneath the leaves, the next archive is almost silent. Mud, cavestone, and watermarks left behind over time. At Lake Chichancanab, on the Yucatan Peninsula, researchers have pulled long cores from the mud, narrow cylinders of sediment laid down year after year. In wetter periods, the lake layers preserve one measurable chemical pattern. When rainfall drops and evaporation concentrates the water, gypsum and isotope signals shift. The mud becomes a climate ledger, not a perfect diary. Farther south, in Yokbalum Cave in Belize, the archive forms drop by drop. Stalagmites grow as mineral-rich water moves through limestone, leaving bands that can be dated and read for shifts in rainfall. These records do not describe every city or every year directly. They are regional proxy signals, evidence that water was becoming less reliable across a wider landscape. Lined up against the classic Maya timeline, the overlap is hard to ignore. Multiple paleoclimate studies point to severe drought episodes between roughly 800 and 1000 CE, the same broad period when many southern lowland royal centers were under strain and their carved public records begin to thin, then stop. For a city dependent on seasonal rain, reservoirs, managed fields, and coordinated labor, drought was more than a bad harvest. A failed rainy season could lower reservoirs. Repeated dry years could mean weaker crops, longer walks for water, disputes over stored food, and fewer resources for kings who claimed they could keep the world in balance. Drought is pressure, not proof of one universal collapse. It does not show that everyone died or that every city failed the same way. Some communities adapted. Some regions endured. The evidence points to climate stress severe enough to test an already crowded, engineered landscape. Then the timeline leaves the climate chart and enters the human record cut into stone. Classic Maya rulers staged memory in public. On stelae and carved panels, kings recorded accessions, rituals, victories, alliances, and dates with extraordinary precision. These monuments were political instruments. They told the city who ruled, who had divine favor, and how the present king fit into a sacred chain of authority. So when those dated monuments stop, it is not just silence, it is a political signal. But it does not happen everywhere at once. At Copan, in present-day Honduras, the royal monument tradition fades around 822 CE. Far to the north, Tikal is still carving later into the 9th century, with one of its final dated monuments around 869 CE. At Calakmul, the great rival power in the central lowlands, the record reaches around 909 CE. That spread of dates undercuts the overnight disappearance story. If this were one sudden strike, one instant plague, one mass vanishing, one regional blackout, the record should collapse like a switch being thrown. Instead, the record dims like city lights going out one by one across generations. The silence of stone is not the extinction of people. It means courts could no longer keep projecting royal power in the old way. The institutions that paid scribes, organized labor, staged ceremonies, and made kings visible were breaking down unevenly from city to city. The dated stelae give us the sequence. A staggered silence rules out the simple vanishing story and raises the harder question. What pushed these kingdoms past the point where kings could still make the world look ordered? By now, the evidence is not pointing to a single cause. The pattern looks more like a chain reaction. Lay the clues together for a moment. LiDAR shows a dense, lowland landscape. Mud and cavestone preserve drought signals. Dated royal monuments fall silent at different times. None explains everything alone. Side by side, they show a system losing its room to absorb shocks. In wetter generations, reservoirs, terraces, canals, and managed fields could support crowded cities and ambitious courts. Once rainfall became less reliable, that same density became harder to carry. Households needed water. Fields needed moisture. Workers had to keep reservoirs clear, crops moving, and ceremonies funded. The land itself may have offered less cushion than it once seemed to. To build cities, fuel lime plaster production, open farmland, and maintain households, forests were cut back in many areas. Over time, deforestation and soil exhaustion could make drought bite harder because damaged land holds water less well, and tired fields produce less when rain fails. Political pressure enters through the inscriptions and the landscape. Classic Maya kings did not rule a single peaceful empire. Rival courts competed for captives, tribute, prestige, and sacred authority. Inscriptions record warfare, shifting alliances, and defeats. Fortifications visible in some LiDAR landscapes suggest conflict was not only ceremonial theater. In some places, security itself became part of the built environment. Picture that pressure at the edge of a city court. Harvests weaken, reservoir levels drop. Nobles demand loyalty. Enemies test borders. A king whose authority depends on public order has fewer visible ways to make that order believable. The human record carries the strain in quieter form. Bioarchaeological studies of Maya remains have identified signs consistent with chronic stress, including malnutrition markers such as enamel defects from childhood hardship and evidence of localized violence in particular contexts. That is not the fingerprint of an instant engineered plague sweeping every city clean. It looks more like communities living through hunger, conflict, and repeated stress. The strongest explanation is a cascade. Drought pressing on an engineered landscape, food insecurity reaching households, warfare and royal competition draining resources, and political legitimacy weakening as courts failed to deliver stability. Once the collapse becomes a cascade, the old myths reveal something else: how tempting a single cause story can be. One famous image comes from Palenque, the carved sarcophagus lid of King Kinich Janab Pakal. Seen without context, Pakal appears tilted inside a dense frame of symbols, surrounded by curling forms and layered shapes. In the 20th century, fringe writers recast the image as an astronaut at the controls of a machine. The claim was dramatic, visual, and simple, exactly the kind of story that travels faster than a careful translation. But in mainstream Maya interpretation, the lid belongs to Maya cosmology. Pakal is shown connected to the world tree, the axis linking the heavens, the earthly realm, and Xibalba, the underworld. The image is not technical instruction. It is royal theology carved in stone, a king placed inside a sacred universe. The same pattern helps explain why alien exodus and ancient bioweapon stories survive. They compress generations of drought, political failure, food stress, warfare, migration, and adaptation into one clean cinematic cause. They also turn Maya knowledge into something that must have come from outside, instead of recognizing the engineering, astronomy, writing, and political ambition already visible in the evidence. There is a deeper cost. To say the Maya vanished is inaccurate, and it pushes living Maya people out of the story. Millions of Maya descendants live today across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and diaspora communities, speaking Maya languages, maintaining cultural traditions, and living within modern histories shaped by conquest, survival, and change. The abandoned royal cities were not proof of disappearance. They were evidence of institutional collapse inside a civilization whose people endured. Return to the ruin for a second. A carved stone face under the canopy, and beneath it, the faint outline of roads, reservoirs, terraces, and fields that were invisible for centuries. The mystery does not disappear, it changes shape. LiDAR shows that these were not isolated temples lost in green emptiness. They were dense, engineered landscapes with roads, terraces, reservoirs, fields, and fortified settlements woven through the forest. Powerful, but vulnerable when stress spread across the system. Lake mud and cave minerals add the pressure line. Severe drought episodes during the centuries when many southern lowland cities were already under strain. The carved stele add the timeline. Copan's royal record fading around 822, Tikal's by 869, Calakmul's by 909, not one flash of destruction, but lights going out city by city. Bones bring the story down to human scale. Signs of chronic malnutrition, childhood stress, and localized violence point to prolonged hardship, not a sudden engineered plague. With those clues in place, the unsupported claims lose their force. No alien evacuation is needed. No ancient bioweapon is proven. What remains is more human and more unsettling. A civilization of extraordinary skill facing overlapping pressures its royal institutions could not always survive. The Maya did survive. The abandoned cities mark the failure of royal systems in particular places, not the disappearance of a people. The question left for us is not where they went, but how communities adapted after the stone monuments fell silent, and what any dense, ambitious society can learn from a landscape that once seemed permanent. The past rarely gives clean answers, it gives clues.